you're hearing from both Rowena and both Pastor Todd and their desires for marriage. I had the very same desires when I decided that I was going to take on purity and what that was going to look like in my life. And I have to tell you, when we talk about the reward, when you're willing to do it God's way, God showed me so much about who I really am and how my past was not to define me. And He did such a healing in that time that I didn't have to be, in the past when I didn't have God to lean on, or I couldn't dwell in His love or His security, I would look for someone else to fill me. And I made it okay to, even if it was temporary, to have a temporary fullness. And that's not even real. It wasn't even real. But what happened is when I gave myself over to God and I started to really learn and get into His Word, you start to realize, for those of you who haven't really read the Bible is the greatest book of recovery ever written. For anyone who has ever struggled, there is nothing that hasn't been written about. If you've struggled with abortion, with addiction, with your sexuality, with everything, it has been addressed, and there is no one who's too far from God. When Pastor Todd talks about my grace is sufficient, there's so much more to that. And what God taught me in those 5 years was how to have boundaries. There were boundaries that I wanted to state for years in my life when I was dating people, and I didn't know how to state them because I was afraid they'd lose interest. That sounds yucky to say, because who wants to admit that? That sounds a little desperate, but yet so many of us do that because we're afraid, what if something better does not come along? What if this is my last chance? What if? And then we start out strong, and then we get discouraged, and we start to bend. We start to bend just a little bit in terms of, well, it could work, or I'll just keep praying, and then maybe it will turn into something, and we start to negotiate, and we start to compromise. What God taught me in that time was God was sufficient for me, that I didn't need anybody else to fill me but God, and that if I could find my security in God, then it would set my marriage up the right way. The future marriage that I had been praying for and longing for, because I was a single mom for 6 years. And I had rededicated my life to God in my own way, much like most of you will have the opportunity to do tonight. And I just wanted to speak to those who are in the wait and those of you who are already married, because purity is not just for the single.
That's right.
But I realize as a married woman, I need purity now more than ever. And it's not just about my body. It's about what enters in my heart, what enters into my mind, and me being able to check on a moment-by-moment basis what I'm letting in. And it's a fine line to deception. And I'll say that when I met the man who's now my husband, I'd always been kind of enamored by the idea of courtship. And I don't know that not everybody is familiar with that term, but my grandmother used to talk about how she was courted by my grandfather, and my mother was courted by my father. And so I asked a lot of questions about that. And then when Javier, my husband now, had asked me, or had let me know that he had a romantic interest, for the first time in my life I was able to say, what is your intention toward me? Because I'm not here to play. And if you have an intention toward me, I need to know that it's pure, and that your intention is to not just play and go with the flow with me, but if we're really going to spend this time getting to know one another, we're going to ask the tough questions. You're going to know my family, I'm going to know your family. We're going to know each other's friends. We're going to watch each other's walk. We're going to ask the tough questions, especially as a single parent. Because, being an independent woman growing up and feeling like I didn't know how to let a man come in and be a man, I probably emasculated most of them, just saying, I got this, I don't need you, because I didn't feel like I knew how to do that until I learned how to submit. That's an ugly word for some people, to God. But submission is really to yield in love. When you feel safe and you can trust someone's love, and God is trustworthy, you will submit. And I knew for myself that if I couldn't submit to God, there was no way I was going to be able to submit to my future husband. Because it was always like, no, I got this. I'm going to have the last word. I'm going to, my pride, all of that. God dealt with that in those 5 years and laid those to rest because, like Pastor Todd said, those all came from my own past insecurities. So how this sets you up for marriage, purity, you being able to understand what to do when your thoughts go crazy and your husband or your wife does something that doesn't meet your expectations and you want to condemn them or criticize them, or you feel like you didn't do what I expected you to do, right? We're so easy to point that finger. What God does, if you've submitted to Him, is you can actually step back from accusation, because you always have a choice in life. You can be an accuser or an intercessor. Okay, and if you're an accuser, you just lined yourself up with the enemy's mentality. And if you're an intercessor, you just lined up yourself up with the mind of Christ. We all have an opportunity. And this is not just about your love relationships. It's about your friendships. It's about your family. Because when somebody hurts you, misleads you, offends you, let me tell you, the quickest way to a hardened heart is to let the offense get to you when someone has offended you because they didn't meet your expectation. The best thing to do, what I've learned to do only by submission, was step back and pray for my husband. Not pray God change him so he'll agree with me, because I've heard about those prayers. Those are manipulative. It's to strip yourself of all agenda. And that's purity. That's pure heart, pure love. Be able to say, God, I'm not sure why he came at me like that. I'm not sure. I don't totally understand, but he's going through something. So I just pray blessing over my husband right now, and I pray wisdom for myself, from you, that you would help me, expand me in my patience, expand me in my love, to see him the way you see him. Because the way God sees each one of you and the people you love, he sees you through the filter of someone perfect. That's Jesus. There is an incredible filter there. And if you ask God to show you that, you can even be with your parents, people who irritate you. God, show me how to have a heart of compassion for that person. Intercede, pray blessing. Pray, God, would you meet them wherever they're at, because they're struggling, and I'm getting the brunt of it. But let me bear in that. And that's love. When you talk about pure love, bears all things. Amen. Bears all things. And it's another level of submission. And when my husband, at times, I found where I'm like, why did he do that? Why did he do this? I go into my little prayer closet, which is sometimes my bathroom, and I just go, God, forgive me, because I'm looking for him to make me secure. And my security, even as a married woman, rests in you. Yeah. Would you fill me, God? And when he fills me, and I just stand in that prayer, and I can feel the wholeness, a funny thing happens. I can actually go out and talk to my husband lovingly. Yeah. Because God's dealt with me first. Or at other times the prayers, God, would you expose to me why this hurts me so much? Why I'm so offended by this? Because obviously he hit a wound, an old wound, a sensitive point, a blind spot of something in me. And God is pretty faithful to gut up whatever is really going on there. And then God will let me know the timing to speak to my husband. Now I'll tell you, in the past, this is the power of God. Because in my past, I would just run my mouth. My mouth will say, hey, I'm going to say what's on my mind. This is how I feel. This is what I deserve. This is what all that self-entitlement, we do that a lot. But if you submit your heart first, and you say, God, would you clean it out, whatever's going on in there, even if you don't know what it is, he does. And you trust that, and you say, then give me the wisdom on how to have this conversation. God will do a work in there. So I want you to know that today, if you take the covenant today for purity, you can take it as a married person too. That says, and you can take it as a person whether you're searching for your mate or not. Just being able to say, this is not about you and your spouse. This is about you and where you stand with God. Yeah. And a covenant is lifelong, irrevocable, which is what is printed on that invitation. And no, we're not going to ask you to turn those in. Those are for you. Like we said, you could throw it away, you could frame it, you could bookmark it, you could hold it somewhere too, but that's between you and God. But I'll tell you, if you're sitting here today and you are hurting, married or unmarried, because I'll tell you, it's a miserable thing to be married and still feel lonely. Okay? So for those of you who are longing, who are sitting there in the longing of being single, wanting to be married, you carry the same emptiness inside if you haven't yet let God fill you and restore that. It's just more of it because you're taking it on with another person. So this is the power of getting right with God first. It's the power of saying, God, whatever's buried in there, would you dredge it up and deal with it? And show me how to deal with it. And then help me recognize a man or a woman who is submitted to you too. Because I'll tell you, if your mate or your spouse is submitted as well, they'll know exactly who to turn to when things get tough. It's a constant thing with my husband and I. We both love the Lord so much, but I had to know that he was submitted to God first, not me, and not my first submission goes to God, and then God then gives me the strength to submit lovingly to my husband. And lets me know that sometimes when he attacks or he's overwhelmed by something, it's not about me. It's not about what's going on with us. There's something else going on. And I need to just trust my husband's love, but I can lovingly either correct lovingly or come in with a real conversation that has no agenda about being right. We get into a lot of trouble trying to be right instead of being loving, instead of going out to love that person beyond how they're acting. But God will expand you far beyond what you think you're capable of, and this is why we need him so.